Good evening. Happy Sunday night. Hope everybody's doing well. As you come across this video, hope you've had a great week and a good weekend. And of course, as we close up shop on this Sunday night, looking forward to another week to come. So jump in, if you got a Bible, on Nehemiah chapter number 7. And let's look at a few verses together. So we got 2 more Sunday nights in January, and I'm going to just wrap up tonight and next week. Just some thoughts with the book of Nehemiah, and then we'll proceed from there, whichever direction we end up going. But I want to bring you first to Nehemiah chapter number 7, verses 1 and 2, okay? And then we'll backtrack a little bit and cover a few things, but be a brief thought, brief challenge for you tonight, amen? Chapter number 7 of the book of Nehemiah, verse number 1 begins, "Now it came to pass when the wall was built, and I had set up the doors and the porters and the singers and the Levites were appointed, that I gave my brother Hanani and Hanani, the ruler of the palace, charge over Jerusalem, for he was a faithful man and feared God above many. But first, let's backtrack to verse number 1. Did you catch it? Now it came to pass when the wall was built. It feels like just a few weeks ago, we started off on this journey through the book of Nehemiah. When Nehemiah received word from his brother that the people in Jerusalem were in great reproach and great distress and oppression and depression, and the walls were burned with fire, the gates were consumed with fire, the walls were broken down. And Nehemiah, remember in chapter number 1, prayed to God, rent his clothes, sackcloth, ashes, fasting, mourning, crying out to God on behalf of his people. And then he went before the king, and he was the king's cupbearer. He had not been before sad in the presence of the king, and the king knew something was up. He said, why are you sad? Nehemiah proceeded to tell him about his people in Jerusalem. Why shouldn't I be sad, O king, when the people, my ancestors, the people of my hometown there, they're just, the gates are ruined and they're lying waste. And you remember, well, what do you need? And then they had that discussion there in chapter number 2. And Nehemiah set out on this journey to come back to Jerusalem to help to rebuild the walls. And it's fascinating just here as we come to chapter 7, verse number 1, that the wall was built. And a lot of things have taken place in between. We looked at several things, of course, a lot of prayer, a lot of God, right? A lot of opposition. There was a lot of times where specifically Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem, the Arabian, a lot of turmoil, a lot of opposition, a lot of attack and just different things. But again, a lot of work and planning and preparation on the part of Nehemiah and the people that were helping him. And they would constantly go to God, and they would get guidance, and they would get strength from the Lord, and then they would plan and they would prepare. And we remember reading, as they were being attacked, literally, they would have some people working on the wall while the others watched guard. And there's lessons there on watch and pray, right? Watch and pray, and they're working and watching and praying and all these different things, and now there's completion. The wall is finished. Matter of fact, let's backtrack to chapter number 6 to verse number 15. You see the wall being finished. Chapter 6, verse number 15 of Nehemiah says, "So the wall was finished in the 25th day of the month Elul, in 52 days." Isn't that crazy? Just under 2 months, they finished the walls. And it came to pass that when all of our enemies heard thereof, and all the heathen that were about us saw these things, they were much cast down in their own eyes. For they perceived that this work was wrought of our God. And the people that had been opposing them these 52 days, they realized, okay, they finished, the breaches are repaired, the wall is complete, and they realized that there must be a God helping them out. There's no other explanation. And isn't it cool when you have something like that happen in your life where the only explanation is God? Like, it's a God thing. And I think I mentioned it last Sunday night, the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the book of Daniel, and went over in Carrie's 3rd grade class in our Christian school here at the church. She'd been doing radiation each morning, and so I get to kind of start the day with the 3rd graders doing pledges, prayer requests, and Bible lesson. And typically by then she's back. So don't worry, you parents, I'm not teaching them math and reading and all that type of stuff, science. But I am teaching them the Bible, and our study has been in Daniel. And they enjoyed the story of the fiery furnace, and they were like looking forward to the lion's den, and that's coming up next. But you remember in that story of the fiery furnace when Nebuchadnezzar got the big head after the vision, and Daniel interpreted the dream that there was this big head of gold, and that was Nebuchadnezzar. And so he's like, yeah, got to thinking he was somebody, and built up that crazy big statue of himself and played the instruments, and everybody bowed down except Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And after the whole story of the fiery furnace, Nebuchadnezzar makes a statement after seeing them emerge from the fire without even a singe, their hair being singed or their clothes smelling like smoke or anything. He said, their God is a God of gods. Like, there's no other explanation in this situation, in this story, but God. And the same here, the people, Bible says there in verse 16, that the enemies and the heathen that were opposing them, they were cast down in their own eyes, for they perceived that this work was definitely wrought of our God. Moreover, in those days, the nobles of Judah sent many letters unto Tobiah, and the letters of Tobiah came unto them, for there were many in Jerusalem sworn unto him, because he was the son-in-law of Shechaniah, the son of Era, and his son Johanan had taken the daughter of Meshullam, the son of Berechiah. Also they reported his good deeds before me, and uttered my words to him, and Tobiah sent letters to put me in fear. So still again, some opposition, even after the completion of the wall. But there we have it. Verse number 15, the wall is completed. 50 in 2 days. Amazing, fascinating story, the wall being done. Also in chapter 6, because we didn't look at chapter 6 or the end of chapter 5, but again, when you're cramming it in 5 weeks, just pulling certain things out. But chapter 5, all this, worth reading, worth investigating on your own time. I've been reading through it and just reminding of all the good stuff in the book of Nehemiah. But Nehemiah chapter 5, he deals with the people that were poorer had been being taken advantage of, and people were hungry and people were going without, and then people had mortgaged their fields and mortgaged their lands and different things like that. And Nehemiah basically was saying, I haven't done any of this. I haven't taken of the government's allowance. I've been of my own money. I've been feeding 150 nobles, at my table. And at the end of chapter 5, verse number 19, think upon me, my God, for good, according to all that I have done for this people. And just that reminder of, as you go through your life, hopefully you're trying to go about doing good unto other people. And it might not be noticed among other people or from other people, but Nehemiah says there, as he's just him and God, he says, think upon me, God, for the good that I've done for these people. And always remember the good that you do for the work of God and for others. God is taking into account and keeping track. And there will be a day, someday, when we receive a reward for the good that we've done for God's kingdom. And think upon me. That's a good verse. Chapter 5, verse number 19. Think upon me, my God, for good, according to all that I have done for this people. And God knows the good, the bad, the ugly, right? Something else I was discussing with the young people. The eyes of the Lord are in every place, beholding the evil and the good. He sees everything that we do. Well, be careful, little hands, what you do, right? For the Father up above is looking down in love. And there's that kid's song there for us, reminding us that God sees everything. He is omnipotent. He is sovereign. He is overall. He sees all. But Nehemiah, there's a good verse for you. Think upon me, my God, for good, according to all that I've done for this people. And then another key verse of the whole book of Nehemiah is found in chapter number 6, verse number 3. In fact, Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem come along, and again, the enemies, they heard that Nehemiah had builded the wall, verse number 1, that there was no breach left therein. Though at that time I had not set up the doors upon the gates, but the wall was just about done. That Sanballat and Geshem sent unto me, saying, come, let us meet together in some one of the villages of Ono. But they thought to do me mischief. And Nehemiah there just had some discernment, had some understanding from the Lord. And so he sent back messengers in verse number 3, said unto them, I am doing a great work so that I cannot come down. And I'm actually using an old Bible for this study, and I've got that underlined, and I've got different little notes here and there of different places where I've heard that text preached from. But Nehemiah, he made that statement, I'm doing a great work. I can't come down. I can't be distracted, can't be sidetracked. I can't be caught off guard by you trying to do me mischief, trying to pull me off track. I'm doing a great work. And no matter what you're doing for God, it's a great work. And God's work it's a great work. And church work, ministry work, world missions, serving others, helping the poor, having compassion upon your neighbor, whatever it is, man, if it's for others, if it's for God, it's for others. It's a great work. And Nehemiah said, I'm doing a great work. I cannot come down. Why should the work cease whilst I leave it and come down, to you. And so they went back and forth, but a couple other, just again, didn't want to completely omit those, but a couple great verses there in chapter 5 and chapter number 6. So now we get to chapter number 7, as I said, and we'll see the first 2 verses that I read earlier. Came to pass when the wall was built and I had set up the doors. Remember in chapter 6, verse number 1, he said, the wall was built, but I had not set up the doors. Well, now finishing those last minute projects, right? And, saw recently a friend of mine on Facebook said, and he enjoys taking sick days and just watching, Fixer Upper with Chip and Joanna Gaines. And I enjoy watching those shows too, right? And, they're hustling around at the last minute for those few last minute minor details to complete the project before doing the unveiling for the homeowners. And so I pictured Nehemiah kind of just hustling around doing those last minute touches. The wall was built. I had set up the doors, and the porters and the singers and the Levites were appointed. So the people were ready for worship and for service. But notice verse number 2. This is another lesson that I learned years ago from this passage, and really what I want to just conclude with tonight and drive home to us. He says in verse number 2 that I gave my brother Hanani, the ruler of the palace, charge over Jerusalem. I've got these next 2 phrases underlined. For he was a faithful man and feared God above many. He was a faithful man and feared God above many. The Bible speaks much to faithfulness and being faithful. And I jotted down a few verses, and several. These are kind of, I would say, the more familiar scriptures. Perhaps now, if I were to pause and just take a moment and have you rack your brain for verses that you've heard over the years or that you've seen, read, memorized, and known on faithfulness, about us being faithful to the Lord. Perhaps these ones would come to your mind. I'll give you 5, 4, 3, 2. Proverbs chapter 20, verse number 6 is one that came to mind. Most men will proclaim every one his own goodness, but a faithful man who can find? But a faithful man who can find? Proverbs, another proverb, 28:20. Bible just simply says, a faithful man shall abound with blessings. A faithful man shall abound with blessings. 1 Corinthians 4:2. And again, there's so many more. These are just a handful that came to my mind first. 1 Corinthians 4:2. Bible tells us, moreover, it is required in stewards that a man be found, you guessed it, faithful. And then later on in that passage, Paul is addressing some things with the church at Corinth. He mentions Timothy. He says, for this cause have I sent unto you Timotheus, who is my beloved son and faithful in the Lord, who shall bring you into remembrance of my ways which be in Christ, as I teach everywhere in every church. Just right there in the middle, a little simple phrase describing Timothy, just faithful in the Lord. And, you know, the church is made up of a lot of different people, a lot of different skill sets, a lot of different personalities, a lot of different strengths, weaknesses, and so on and so forth, right? The Bible talks about that in Corinthians, about he likens the church to a body. And every part of the body, it has different functions. All are super important, right? And sometimes we can maybe think that we're not that important, or we're not that significant to the cause of Christ, to the local body, to Timberline Baptist Church. Couldn't be farther from the truth. There's still a handful of people at the church that I haven't got to know yet. I've been here for a year, you know, and I try to meet everybody and get to know everybody, of course, make relationships and connections and things. And perhaps sometimes you find yourself sitting there in the chairs, and again, maybe you're not known, or you know, a lot of people don't know your name or who you are or things of that nature. And that's okay. You're significant. First of all, you're known to God. And I guarantee you're known to Pastor and Miss Tony. I mean, they do a great job shepherding the flock and caring for the flock and for the people. And you are known to people. But what I'm trying to say is everybody's different. It's a made up of just a variety of different types of people, gifts, strengths, callings, and so on and so forth. But one thing that we can all have in common, we can all do, is be faithful. We can be faithful. And God makes a big deal out of faithfulness. Years ago, when I read this for the first time, that was one of the verses in the whole book of Nehemiah that stood out to me. That Nehemiah put this man in charge. Why? For he was a faithful man, and he feared God above many. That's something that we all can do. We can be faithful, and we can fear God, right? Here's a quote that I saw and thought it would be fitting to share with you tonight. Many folks who aren't all that gifted, you know, they can't sing, can't remember a bunch of Bible verses, they don't have a knack for teaching and so forth, can still be used greatly of God if they are faithful and fear God. And on the other hand, many terribly gifted people may always be frustrated in serving God if they are not faithful in fearing God. So it's just, again, chapter 7, verse number 2. I gave my brother Hananiah, the ruler of the palace, charge over Jerusalem. Why? For he was a faithful man and feared God above many. Can I just challenge you tonight, the last takeaway here as we close, just to be faithful. Just to be faithful. Press on, man, every day, doing your thing, in your place, being where you're supposed to be, for your family, for your kids, for whoever. Someone's counting on you, someone needs you, someone's watching you. Friends, let's each of us do our part in God's work, in God's house, in God's kingdom, to just be faithful and fear God. Just a couple of thoughts here from Nehemiah. It's just 15 minutes tonight. Keep it short and sweet for you, like I promised I would. And we'll conclude next week, the final Sunday night in January. And I got a great verse for you in Nehemiah chapter 13. So tune in then. We'll see you Wednesday night. We'll see you for sure next Sunday morning. And then we'll be back together virtually next Sunday night. Hope you have a great week. And God bless you. Take care now.